Today, we're going to look at aviation from two totally different angles. First, there's this invisible world of data, of systems that keep us safe in the sky. And then there's the very visible, very human world of stories, the kind that grab our attention and spark these huge debates. We're going from cold, hard numbers to raw, powerful emotion. All right, let's get into it.
So I want to start with this number, $13.2 billion. That's the estimated economic benefit over 10 years from a tiny government program that you've almost certainly never heard of.
And that's really the first big question here. What is this thing? How does some program that flies completely under the radar create so much value for the entire U.S. economy? Well, the answer pulls back the curtain on this hidden world of safety and efficiency that's running behind the scenes of every single flight you take.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with that invisible safety net and unpack those billions in hidden benefits. Then, we're going to make a hard turn into a completely different kind of story, one that echoes a really dark day in aviation history, gets put under a microscope, and then just explodes into a political firestorm. And finally, we'll try to connect these two very different worlds and figure out what it all means. Okay, so let's start with the system. This is the part of air travel none of us ever see, but we all rely on it completely. It's a world built on nothing but data, precision, and this relentless focus on keeping things safe.
At the heart of all this is something called the Aeronautical Survey Program, or the ASP. The easiest way to think about it is like a quality control check for our airports. Private contractors go out and survey for things that might get in the way, like new buildings or trees. The ASP is the independent government team that comes in and double, even triple checks all that data. They make sure it's perfect, because when you're talking about air travel, close enough just doesn't cut it.
And the process itself? It's actually pretty simple. Step 1. A private company does the survey. Step 2. The ASP acts as that expert second opinion, validating every single critical detail. And then, Step 3, once the ASP gives the thumbs up, the FAA uses that trusted data to make huge decisions about flight paths and airport upgrades. It's like this simple three-step dance that keeps the whole system humming along.
And this stuff has a massive impact in the real world. I mean, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. This data is what allows the FAA to approve brand new runways, to authorize those incredible all-weather landing systems that get you home safely in a storm. And, at the end of the day, it just makes our airports way more efficient.
So, how in the world does this tiny program lead to that huge number we started with? Well, it all comes down to the absolutely staggering return on investment.
Just look at this. The entire Aeronautical Survey program costs less than $3 million a year to run, but by making sure our airports can run at peak safety and efficiency, the economic benefit over just one decade is estimated to be up to 13.2 times billion dollars. I mean, that return is just off the charts.
So where does all that value come from? Well, it's a bunch of things working together. You get more efficient flight paths, which saves airlines a ton of money on fuel. Those better landing systems mean fewer delays when the weather gets bad, which saves all of us time and headaches. And of course, being able to safely expand airports means more flights, which boosts local economies. It's like this quiet, invisible engine for economic growth. And now, we're going to pivot hard. We've been in this very logical, clean world of data and systems. But aviation is also a world of incredibly powerful human stories and deep emotions. And sometimes, the biggest conversations aren't about the systems that work, but about the trauma we all carry from when they failed. These incredibly complex safety systems just work, silently, every single day. Until one day they don't. The memory of September 11th it's burned into our collective psyche. And it continues to shape our politics, our fears, and the stories we tell ourselves. And that brings us to a really recent controversy. It's centered on a New York City mayoral candidate named Zoran Mamdani. He shared what he said was a personal story connected to 9/11, but that story very quickly got put under a microscope, and it just lit up a national debate. So, during a pretty emotional speech about Islamophobia, Mamdani shared this anecdote. He said, "I want to speak to the memory of my aunt who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab." It was this really powerful, personal story meant to show the kind of fear that lingered in the Muslim community after the attacks.
But almost immediately, the story started to fall apart. Soon after the speech, some internet researchers pointed out that his aunt, or the one they could find, apparently lived in Tanzania back in 2001. That discrepancy led to all these accusations that he'd made the whole thing up, and it forced Mamdani to hold a press conference to try and clear the air.
And here was the clarification he gave. The woman he was talking about wasn't actually his direct aunt, but a distant cousin of his father who had passed away a while ago. He explained that in his culture, the term for a paternal aunt, fuhi, is often used for relatives like her. So, long story short, the key details of his story had definitely shifted under pressure.
But, instead of calming things down, that clarification, it basically just threw gasoline on the fire. It intensified the political fallout, and suddenly it felt like everyone had an opinion on this.
One of the first, and frankly, sharpest criticisms came from Vice President J.D. Vance. He posted this, pretty much mocking Mamdani, and suggesting he was trying to minimize the real tragedy of 9/11 by focusing on his relative being uncomfortable.
The criticism from people who were directly affected by the attacks was even more pointed. One 9/11 family member called him a despicable liar and said that comparing feeling unsafe on a subway to the murder of almost 3,000 people was just deeply, deeply insensitive.
But Mamdani definitely had his defenders too. The journalist Mehdi Hassan flipped the script, framing the criticism as the problem. He tweeted, "Imagine publicly mocking other brown people as they talk publicly and emotionally about their experience of racism." So for him, this wasn't about facts, it was about racial and religious sensitivity.
And from there, the whole debate just escalated even further. Responding to Hassan, the far-right activist Laura Loomer jumped in and made it clear that, for her, the issue wasn't about race but about religion, saying, "Our problem isn't with brown people, it's with Islam." A comment that just moved the whole argument into even more charged territory.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and try to bring these two worlds back together. Because on one hand, you've got these invisible, data-driven systems that basically make modern life possible. And on the other hand, you've got these loud, emotional, and frankly, very messy human stories that seem to drive our political reality.
And this contrast is everything. You have the world of the runway. It's logical, it's systematic, it's built on cold, hard data that quietly generates billions in value. And then you have the world of the passenger jet. It's a symbol of progress, sure, but it's also a symbol of immense tragedy. It's a trigger for stories that ignite these incredibly powerful emotional and political fires. We rely on the system, but we are moved by the story.
Which leaves us with one last question to think about. A tiny government program that creates $13 billion of value gets almost no attention at all. A disputed anecdote about a distant cousin becomes a national firestorm. So in a world full of complex data and powerful emotions, what does it say about us? Which stories get our attention and why?